Hey, this is Dave Lax, and I'm here interviewing my good buddy Steve Patschke, author of many books, librarian, and an extraordinary guy. Steve, tell me how you got started in the whole writing business.
Well, I got started because I became a children's librarian, and when I got into the library, a lot of children came and asked me, do you have this kind of book or that kind of book? And I looked around, and there was some big holes in certain areas of the genres, and I said to myself, what was there? I could do better than that. It's the old story of, I could do this, let me try doing it.
Tell me a little bit about your background.
I started writing poetry when I was in high school, and I won a couple of awards, and that encouraged me. And when I got into college, I pursued a degree in English literature, and pursued more poetry writing. And from there, I got a master's degree in library science. And being in the library, it was very inspirational for me. Yep.
Now you got to tell me, you come from Africa.
Originally, I was born in Africa, and my father was in the Navy, and so we were stationed in Africa. And actually, when I was born, it was in French Morocco. And Morocco, the natives were rebelling against the French colonials, and there was a small revolution going on when I was there.
Were you aware of that as a kid?
It was a lot of disturbances, but as a child, no, I was much too young. I left when I was about 2 years old. But I used to chase donkeys down the street with palm leaves.
Oh my God.
My mother said I would yell in Arabic, "Imshi, imshi," which means scram.
Tell me about your first book and what inspired you to write it.
The first book was called Don't Look at It, Don't Touch It. And I was inspired.
You went to look at it, but you didn't touch.
I looked at it, but I didn't touch it. I should have. And I was inspired by the phrase that I read in a book to some children. I was doing a reading. And the phrase was, a little boy got bit by a bee, and the mother said, don't look at it, don't touch it. For some reason, that idea, don't look at it, don't touch it, I thought would be great for a spooky book, which I knew children needed some spooky books. And so I went home and I set out to write this one. I wanted to make it spooky, but not too spooky. Most mothers don't want it too spooky, children want it very spooky. So I was aiming for the middle road. And in my story, a group of children find a black box, and the black box has written on the top of it, don't look at it, don't touch it. So children being children, naturally, what do? They looked at it, they touched it, and inside they found a note, and the note said, don't read this note, and it said, don't follow this trail, don't go to the spooky house, and all along, of course, the children are doing what they're not supposed to do. And the story is a progression. Children start disappearing, and it's left with one child, and she opens up a door, and the door says, don't open this door. Of course, she opens it, and they're having a surprise party.
So after you wrote this book, you followed it with the spooky book. Tell us a little bit about that one.
The spooky book was a little more difficult to write. Don't Look at It, Don't Touch It, I wrote in about 20 minutes. When I came home, the idea just came to me. But the spooky book took about 2 years. My wife actually gave me some ideas, and it's more of an intricate plot. The spooky book is about a boy who's reading a spooky book, and he's reading about a girl who's also reading a book. And every time something spooky happens to the girl in the story, it starts to happen to the boy. She hears noises outside, he hears noises outside. She runs outside in the rain, and he gets more frightened. And it comes to a point where there's a knock on the door, and he opens the door, and who's there but the girl that he was reading about. And she says, "Hi, I'm your new neighbor." And she's holding the spooky book that he's reading in his hand. And what I particularly liked about it was the cover of the book. I asked the publisher if they could put the actual cover of the book in the story so that the spooky book is the spooky book that they're both reading. Little complicated.
Did you actually do the illustrations on these?
No, and that's the number one question that most people ask me is, do you have to do the illustrations when you send it off to a publisher? And the most important answer is no, please do not. My advice to writers is not to try to do the illustrations unless you think you're extraordinarily well adept at being an illustrator and an author, because usually what happens is the illustrations are accepted by the publisher and not the story, or vice versa. So whatever your forte is, I would stick with that, and it's not necessary for you to send off illustrations, however crude. When time comes with Don't Look at It, Don't Touch It, they were very nice, the publishers, in allowing me to make a lot of suggestions on how I visualized it, and they went along with almost 100% of my suggestions, the illustrator, and I was very lucky. But I'll tell you, that moment when your book comes to your house and you open it up and you're going to see the illustrations the first time, most picture book authors are they say it's the worst moment, because a good illustration can make or break a story.
What do you find people want to know most about you as an author?
Mostly they want to know how they can, everyone has a book inside of them. And they all want to know how they can break into the business, or was it difficult for me? And it's my advice to them is to pursue what you're doing. Most people don't believe in themselves. You should believe in yourself and stick with it. And if you honestly think you could do it, go for it. Someone told me the greatest hallmark for knowing whether you should pursue a dream is, they said, when you wake up in the morning, if that's the first thing you think about, that's what you should do.
Wow. Steve, tell me, what's the hardest thing about being an author? To come up, what's the hardest part of creating a story? How does it all happen?
Well, I don't have a word for it. Maybe I should come up for it. I think it's the moment of reality. I get an idea, I get inspired by it, and I'm all ready to go with it. And I lay out a real rough draft sometimes in my mind, which is really great. And then inevitably you hit a part where it's like, oh, wait a minute, the first problem. Oh, that's not going to work. Wait, I got to change that. And it deflates you a little bit. But if you keep working through the problems, it's very rewarding in the end.
Steve, do you have any advice for young writers who might want to do a book?
My advice is do your homework. Read every how-to book you can get your hand on. Get a good support group behind you. Join a writer's club, writer's group. And most of all, the old adage, practice, practice, practice. I would say write for an hour every day. Read as much as you can in the areas that you're interested. And just keep pursuing it.
So you find that a lot of people want to know how they could break into being a writer. They probably want to tap your information and ask questions. That's fascinating, fascinating. I understand you play the harmonica too.
I do.
You're a musician. You're a school librarian at Phoenicia. You're an author. An amazing guy. Just totally amazing.
And
guy.
I can juggle.
And he can juggle too.
Right.
That's pretty good. And a good friend of mine too. So I'd like to say thanks for coming. This is Dave Lax with Meet
Thanks,
the
Dave.
Author. And until next time, have a good time. Bye, everybody. By the way, Steve, I have a question. I started this idea on a book, and I thought you might be able to help me with it.
I think you go far.